Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Rory and James podcast. This is officially our third episode. So I'm James, and I'm joined by the famous Rory. Hello, Rory.
Hello. Our typical intro, folks, that was, but I really enjoyed it. There you go.
So, for those of you who are loyal listeners, you might know the setup for this podcast. But for new listeners, we pick two subjects, either from listeners who recommend subjects, or we pick our own, and we just discuss those topics and we try and make them different and sort of interesting for each episode. So we've got two today. The first one's going to be around university and self-education, and the other one around autism and music. So I think we'll just dive straight in so that we're not wasting any time. And the first one, so yeah, we're talking about university and comparing that to self-education. And we've sort of got differing experiences here because I did go to university, and Rory, you yourself didn't go to university as such, did you? But you did do the Orpheus sort of music. So it had very much a campus kind of educational feel to it. Is that fair?
Sort of. Yeah. I think if I'd gone, I think if I'd gone to a university during the day, it would have felt less encompassing as if I'd been there all day. But when I take various experiences I've been through over the years or taken, I actually have been to university in a different way. I just haven't been to a university. What was it like for you going to a university?
Well, I sort of had a sort of not so traditional experience because I had a couple of years out after sixth form where I worked. So a lot of my sort of school friends who went to university were sort of already in their second year. Well, actually, I think they were in their third year by the time I'd actually started university. And I also didn't stay on campus and live on campus, which a lot of my friends did. I might spend my first year living at home with my parents, and then I moved up into a flat that was not. It was close to the university, but it wasn't. It was still a good distance away, and sort of lived with various people, including like my brother and my sister and stuff. So I very much just had the pure educational experience rather than the necessarily kind of partying campus kind of lifestyle that I think a lot of people think of when they think of university.
Yeah.
Whereas sort of the reason why I mentioned your experience at Orpheus was I feel like you perhaps had more of that kind of campus vibe because you were living on site, weren't you? Obviously, you were going to sort of classes and doing concerts and whatnot, but you were also staying on site, weren't you, in your own dorm kind of place?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because my primary school never had a secondary version. Yeah, but I was moving on because I used to live at home when I was at primary school, and then quite constantly at boarding school afterwards. But I don't know how I would have reacted to having to take notes or being in lectures or that kind of thing. I think if I had a more class type of university experience that I was used to, I think I would have felt less under pressure to be there had I been there really. But as I say, various experiences I've had over the years, I've actually been there in other ways. Do you feel that you were able to retain a lot of the information you learned at university?
Yeah, a little bit, but I think what's interesting looking back is there wasn't much information really to keep hold of because I mean, so I just did history degree, and looking back, I couldn't believe it that I had 8 hours a week
Mm.
of either seminars or lectures, and the point was that you went away and did your own reading and stuff. But bearing in mind, how much tuition fees have gone up, 8 hours a week really doesn't feel like a lot, and
Mm.
I do wonder if a lot of students get their value for money nowadays. Because I mean, yeah, 8 hours, that's one working day for most of us, but we were doing that in a week, and that was
Yeah,
lectures and
yeah,
seminars combined. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I do look back and think it was a little bit, part time to put it generously.
Maybe in today's world, people would be more open to what people can learn in other ways because there's the internet. There's ways of learning at home. There are things that are worth. There are things that are substantial, but you had to prove that you were worthy. You were worthy of a degree. Some people just say you have to get this degree, regardless of what you can learn in life otherwise. And I think that should apply to things like being a mechanic, things that are very technical. But in terms of jobs that provide more natural instincts, so as the performing arts, maybe educational places should be more open to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the sort of COVID lockdowns sort of highlighted all of that, where a lot of lectures were online, a lot of seminars were online. Suddenly, there was this different way of of learning, which was, what we were talking about earlier, self-education. I mean,
Yeah.
almost was self-education because, I mean, in some ways it wasn't that much different. For example, doing the Open University, which is entirely online, I think.
I think there's also a factor of how much the human brain can retain for the longest time. I think it's up until you're 5 years old. That's when you learn the most information in your life, and the principles you carry forward in life are as important as the technicality of what you learn at university. And also there's the entirety of what you learn at university in your interactions and so forth, as well as what you actually learn when you're there. I just try and look at it from a very broad umbrella rather than an academic one. But some people who may be listening may think of it the other way around.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. And you mentioned that you did things that were sort of similar to university or
mm.
like university. Did you want to expand on that at all? Because that sounds like quite interesting.
Well, I did do a course at Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, and I did do a lot of travel training, and I did do performing arts training, and I have done a business course. So if you take various, as I said before, experiences over the years and then put them together, but as regards the technicality of the world, some people might think you have to get this degree regardless. But I think you can actually train yourself very much these days. A colleague of mine, actually, who I do radio with, is in America extending her university experience. Now she's already told me that she could do her job without going to university, but she just feels she wants to anyway. So it's a matter of personal choice. And
Interesting.
in the COVID lockdown, people were looking at people's qualifications and turning those into the actual achievements for the degrees because they didn't have time to do the degrees because of the lockdown was so sudden. So people were more open-minded about that, really.
Right, interesting.
And certainly, when I was watching Yale University lectures online, just for the interest of doing this research, there was a lot more class interaction between the lecturer and his students. So it wasn't as much taking in the notes, sitting there. It was literally participation from your audience, which made it a lot more accessible than I thought it was going to be before I watched it. But I was watching it without the pressure of having to take the notes. I was just doing it out of my own interest, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Who knows?
I certainly remember seminars were the best part of university because, yeah, for that interactivity, you weren't just sitting there hearing a lecturer talk for an hour and just taking notes. You were actually getting involved and perhaps having a debate or having something explained to you in quite a unique way by the seminar leader. So I think those are much more beneficial than just sort of sitting there listening to someone yabber at you for an hour.
Yeah, some people say that to do work experience in actual places is best because you get the sort of hands-on activities as well as anything else, really. But it's all down to personal experience and how you want to achieve your own education and how relevant you are, and how relevant it is to you in your own way. It's all very individual. But I guess,
Yeah.
but I guess contrastly, universities and places have to have a uniformic way of teaching, so that it can run generally for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. Yeah, yeah. But I have to say though, I think if I did it all again, I wouldn't do a history degree. I mean, I enjoyed reading. Well, I enjoy reading. I enjoy history, but I don't think you sort of spend 3 hours of your 3 years of your life sort of doing a hobby. Like it was what it felt like, really. I think I'd rather done engineering or something which would have got me straight into a really interesting job, and then maybe save the hobby university degree for when I retire or something. I've got time on my hands.
I mean, even if you did do something which you thought was the equivalent of learning at university, you knew your subject so thoroughly that you didn't actually go to university. I think it'd be harder to prove that in the qualificational sense, but it depends on the situation at the time.
Yeah, and that's the problem that most employers now, they're just purely looking at qualifications, and it's normally degrees, even though I'm sure that I'm not sure, I'm absolutely certain there are plenty of people out there who didn't go to university who are far more intelligent than me and most graduates, but have just chosen not to go or don't want to or can't afford it or whatever. And I think it's a very lazy way of trying to look at qualification or trying to look at how good someone is at a job by just looking at whether they got a degree or not. I think that's doesn't necessarily tell you a lot about whether they're a good worker or not.
As I say, maybe if you could make more documentary proof of what you were doing, perhaps in the future you'd be able to prove your own personal skills as well as your qualified ones. When I say you're, I mean anybody in general. I don't mean just us, but you get the idea.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. Well, any final thoughts on that, and sort of any of your experiences that you think are worth sort of finishing up on?
Well, I just think basically when I was on when I was at Liverpool and we were doing a folio and I was travelling around. That was as much as I was happy with it as regards my own education, and so I feel I've been to university and I'm happy with that. But it's very different from the individual. But it's in fact, this is actually one of those subjects that'd be very interesting to get your individual comments on, that listeners, because it's so varied. And I'm just looking forward to hearing what you say. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. So do comment on this video. We read all the comments, and yeah, you've got the email address up on the screen as well. Do send us an email. We read all our emails, and yeah, absolutely. We'll be very fascinated to hear what your own listeners' experiences are.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. Well, on that note, then on to the next subject, which is around autism and music, and you've done a lot of research on this one, Rory. I was going to ask you first of all, though, sort of why, because this is a subject you had picked, and sort of why you wanted to explore this. Sort of what was there anything in particular that made you want to sort of discuss this as a subject?
Well, I just think there's such a spectrum to autism in general. I didn't know it's actually known as autism spectrum disorder. And somebody that I was researching on the TED talks that I was looking at, she knew that her brother had autism, and then realised that she had certain traits that were similar to autism, and she was eventually diagnosed with autism. And Asperger is a higher form of autism, and it was just so variable. I thought it might be interesting as a subject, really. From the musical point of view, do you remember we were looking at Derek Papaccini, the guy that can reinterpret and play anything you ask him to play and that kind of thing, despite the fact he's got learning disabilities of his own. The science behind that, by the way, is that if the neurons in the brain are disrupted by autism, there's an island of talent amongst other disabilities, and that I just thought it was so intriguing from both angles. Do you relate to?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those videos of you're going to have to remind me and the listeners the name of the guy, but those videos of him playing the piano and are absolutely incredible. What was his name again? Just for people who can check him out.
Derek Papaccini. He's what's called a musical savant, and that's literally somebody who's so talented in one area. It's almost like a sort of focus that the brain has, because, as I say, other places are sort of affected, but the result of his music and his interpretation is extraordinary. And in other formats, people can be artists. They can be math geniuses, like Rain Man, wasn't it? Was an example of that, and that kind of thing. It's interesting because some people are so high functioning that autism, you wouldn't know they have it. I once did a survey on Newsweek, which was on the internet, to not diagnose autism, but to see which of those had more similar behavioural patterns to people who didn't have autism. How many alike experiences did the normal person have, really? And I think it was said that somewhere we are all on the autistic spectrum. Have you had any involvement with autism or music yourself?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We all have similar. Yeah, I'll have some traits. I have to admit, I'm a real ignoramus on the subject. Obviously, know of it, and as it comes up in sort of news articles and whatnot. But yeah, I really don't know much about it at all, really. But yeah, so I'm sort of fascinated to learn sort of some of what came out of your research and stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's very intriguing because it's so different in various cases. I mean, there was one chap, I won't necessarily name him, but there was one guy who had Asperger syndrome, which, as I say, is a higher level of just a very, very high functioning level of autism, where you're slightly socially shy, but you're still aware, you're still talented, and so forth. And this chap actually had, when the housemaster at school, he actually asked the housemaster to define his disability. So somebody said to this guy, "What is Asperger?" And the guy turned to the headmaster and said, whose name was Ian, and turned to Ian and said, "Go ahead, Ian." It was so difficult for him. to even express that. Some people who are talented in that area don't even know how they do it. They just happen to have that skill, which is amazing actually. And quite often in those videos that we were seeing, just going back to Derek, the musical guy, his verbal responses, if you remember, were unreliable, but his brain activity demonstrated that he was reacting mentally and emotionally very much in ways that he couldn't express.
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of a bit of a stereotype that I know comes up about autistic people, that they're sort of geniuses, and it's sort of that they may be sort of socially awkward or something, but they're geniuses in some other field like maths or music or whatever. I mean, is that a bit of an unfair stereotype from the research you've been doing?
No, I think that's probably fair, and also because it's I mean, with the best will in the world, if you've broken your arm, you've broken your arm. Whereas if you've always been autistic or always been blind, you don't necessarily know what the differences are, and your so your brain readapts, but your emotions don't, because you're just used to being that. Really, there's some Down syndrome people are very good dancers or very, very emotional, but they're very good creators. So it's all a matter of isolating where that ability is amongst the disability. And
I like that. Yeah, what I was saying was I thought it was a very positive way of looking at that, sort of finding people's individual talents and creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you? I mean, have you ever seen an autistic person perform, or have you had a conversation with an autistic person before?
Well, I think this is an interesting question, because it goes to what you were saying earlier about you saying you break your arm, you've broken your arm, but you suffer from autism, or if you have autism, you don't necessarily know it. And I think it could also go the other way, that I'm sure I have spoken to autistic people. I may have friends who are autistic, I just wouldn't know. Unless someone tells me.
Yeah.
Or makes it explicit. I think that's probably just not come across my mind or whatever. So I think the answer to the question is probably, but I wouldn't actually know.
Yeah, it would be interesting, listeners, to see if our listeners have spoken to, or what autistic related experience is they have. There's a certain. I mean, in a way, although it's an unfortunate disability, as it's amazing how people have overcome it and how people have discovered other aspects connected with the skills of people that have got it and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's some really good charities out there that do really good work. I know this because I did know someone who did some work for an autism charity. Horrendously, I've forgotten the name of the charity, but it was one of the big ones in the UK. And there's some really good ones out there who do really good work. For sort of supporting people who have autism and whatnot.
Absolutely, and as I say, a lot of research I was doing. This was by a guy called Michael Stevens, who's called Vsauce, which is a great channel to see, and also all the TED Talks that I've been watching. They are fascinating on all of these subjects, and so they're a good source if you want to do your own research, listeners.
It's a nice link to our first subject that we're leaving listeners with a homework to do for next time.
Yes,
check out those links.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback. There are so many angles to all of these things, and I hope we've covered a good range. Thank you for listening to us today.
Yeah, any final thoughts before we finish up this episode?
I don't think so. I mean, it's very difficult to encompass one phrase about each thing, but it would be. And no, I think we've covered a good range. What about you? Anything extra you'd like to add?
I think what I'd like to add is just to tell everyone, do subscribe to our channel, our YouTube channel, Rory James Podcast. As we mentioned earlier, do leave us a comment, tell us what your views are on these subjects. Or there's the email on screen, you can email us. We do read all the comments and read all the emails. So yeah, do let us know. And the other thing we always say is if there are any subjects you think we should be talking about for future episodes, do let us know, and we'll definitely be considering those.
Yeah. And talking on the future subjects, our next video will be music, which is a piece of music that James and I have been working on. So look forward to that in the future. And of course, the podcast will be back.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And yeah,
Okay.
we'll see you on the next one.
Take care. Bye.